Hi, everyone. My name is Agatha, and I can say without reservation that I am the strongest girl in the world. Don't you believe me? So maybe let's compete, huh? Okay, I'm kidding. Mom says that I became so strong because in childhood I did not eat anything but meat. And if there was no chicken, duck, or steak on the table, I would cry and stay hungry until I was given a portion of animal protein. It is somehow weird for a child, isn't it? At the same time, Dad believes that I inherited strength from him. I don't know why he thinks so, because he can't even move the truck from its place. Well, let alone the truck. He would never even live in an ordinary passenger car. Oh, Dad. But I do not mind looking like him. For example, anyway, I believe that my grandma came closest to the truth. She said that I was not the most ordinary child. The thing is that right after my birth, I was able to roll over and hold my head, started crawling at the age of 2 months, began sitting when I was 4 months, and at 6 months, I learned how to walk. When I was 1 year old, physically, I was like an active child, aged 5 or 6 years. I was running very fast, doing pull-ups on horizontal bars, walking on my arms, and doing push-ups up to 20 times. It is worth mentioning that not every adult can do such things. However, as I grew older, my physical features stopped improving and I became an ordinary girl who was no better and no worse than any other girl. I was moderately active and moderately athletic, and I had no extraordinary achievements. In short, later everyone kind of forgot that I used to be a special child. At school, I did not understand why it was so difficult for other children to carry backpacks and why we couldn't bring a 20-liter bottle of water to use by ourselves. For example, why did a specially trained man have to do it? Once in the 2nd or 3rd grade, I was sadly watching how a feeble guard was bringing these 2 bottles to our school one by one. At that time, he was twisted so much that it seemed to me that the back of this poor man would soon break and his knees would bend in the wrong direction. Now, I really thought it was just some joke. Well, as for me at home, I can lift such bottles with 2 fingers and even juggle them. Then a brilliant idea came to mind. I decided to help the guard. I came up to the car with the 2 bottles and quickly threw one of them over my shoulder. The other one went over the other shoulder, and then I ran into the school. My classmates, teachers, and that very guard were standing and staring at me with their mouths and eyes wide open. And what about me? Everything was normal. These were just 2 20-liter bottles. That's nothing. And it was after this incident that everyone began to call me an ant. Although I try not to be in the public eye too much anymore and not to draw a lot of attention to myself. Years later, my ability manifested itself again. This time, it was totally unexpected for me. I was walking with friends, and near the supermarket, we saw a car moving backwards towards a baby while the child's mother was packing up the shopping bags in the trunk of her car. No more than 5 seconds were left before the tragedy could happen, and totally unexpectedly for everyone. First of all, for myself, I rushed to that baby. Was it madness? Well, yes, because everyone was sure that we could both be hit by the car. But at that moment, I did not think at all, and everything happened kind of automatically. But we were not destined to die under the wheels because as soon as I ran to him, I grabbed the moving car and lifted it with my bare hands. Can you imagine that? Well, no, not without seeing it with your own eyes. It's impossible to imagine or even believe it. At that moment, the mother of the child ran up screaming and took him away. They left kind of too quickly, but I remained standing with the car in my hands. My friends and passerbys were frozen as well, and this awkward silence lasted about a minute. And then the driver of the lifted car opened the door and said, "Hey, would you put me on the ground?" Oops, that was a bit awkward. Then everyone started asking what was going on and how I managed to do that. Oh, I wish I had known this. I was actually shocked, no less than they were. By the way, the baby's parents found me in a couple of weeks. They were really grateful for saving their son and brought a whole bunch of valuable gifts for me. I was very proud of myself because my ability was invaluable and useful. This time I did not ignore my abilities and decided to test them. I went to the weightlifting club and hoped to understand the limits of my capabilities there. But after a couple of training sessions, the coach refused to work with me. The thing is that the weights he gave me were just funny to me. So I asked for more and more. At the end of the second training, he said, "Sorry, Agatha, have nothing more to give you. You lifted all the loads that were in the gym, and I asked you to find another coach because I don't want to take any risks." In short, he was scared of the responsibility for me and my health. In his practice, I was the first person who easily pulled huge weights and asked for more. But he was talking about another coach, so there is a chance that someone will agree to work with me, right? After all, I am a very promising learner. So I found an experienced mentor who appreciated my abilities. Mr. Charlie, my new coach, decided not to miss his golden opportunity and started working with me very tightly right away. He taught me to carry out corrected grapples, properly position my body, tuck myself up during tugging, and rationally use my energy. In short, a month later, I was totally ready for performances and competitions. My strength started bringing income to me. Mr. Charlie advertised to me very well, and the cost of my performances began to grow after every victory. Step by step, my coach pushed me to more serious levels, and as a result, after a series of victories in 1 year, I was ready for a decisive battle. Mr. Charlie said that I achieved really impossible heights and proved to everyone, but first of all, to myself, that I was truly unique and capable of doing many things. So, in the decisive battle, I had to compete with the record holder of the Guinness Book of World Records. The all-around champion in weightlifting and the strongest man in the world, nicknamed Arnold. I had exactly a month to prepare for the competition. If you know anything about top-class sports, then you understand that this is an incredibly little amount of time. But I began to prepare because there was no way back, and both Arnold and I were challenged. The long-awaited and most exciting day in my life had come when a crowd of spectators and journalists gathered on the track, and there appeared a legend, invincible and unique, Arnold. When he saw me, he decided that this was some kind of joke that a real rival would appear later. So he laughed out loud and said, "Great prank. And now go do your homework, girl. I'm waiting for the one who is the daredevil who decided to challenge me." And then the organizers explained to him that there was no trick and that the daredevil was actually that girl named Agatha. Arnold began to laugh even harder and said that he wasn't going to participate in children's games. He began to leave, but I could not allow this because in that case, all my work and efforts would have been in vain, so I didn't come up with anything better than stopping him. Not in the easiest way. I ran to his car, picked it up, and said that until he fights me, he would not get his car and would not get to go anywhere. Arnold was shocked, of course. He had never seen anything like that in his life. When he almost came to his senses, after the shock, he said that he perceived me as a worthy rival, so he stayed. And the fight began. I had to lift various weights and pull trucks. To warm up, each of us picked up a mini car. Then we switched to crossovers, and the final stage involved trucks. To be honest, I did not expect Arnold to be so strong. He was in no way inferior to me in anything. Our struggle was very intense and fierce. Arnold did not want to lose his title and have to give it to a girl that was 3 times younger than he was. It was not really appropriate. In turn, I wanted to prove to everyone that I was really unique. When we were both exhausted, no one got ahead. We were offered to pull laden trucks. None of us could refuse and retreat because it was already a matter of honor. We grabbed the ropes and started pulling the heavy loads. One step, then another. It was very difficult, and every step was a real feat. At some point, I decided to pull myself together and make a leap forward because I may not have another chance to do this. I gathered all my strength, and there was a crunch, a scream, and I felt a sharp pain. There were circles before my eyes. It was hell. At some point, I even wanted to die so as not to endure this nightmare. I had a feeling that someone stuck a lot of knives in my back and started turning them around. Then an ambulance arrived and I was taken to the emergency room where the doctor told me and my parents that I had a serious back injury. I would definitely have to forget about sports, but it wasn't known for sure whether I would be able to walk again. I refused to believe this. I had so many plans and so much energy, and now I will just have to lie, won't I? Well, no, I said, and probably from this first day I began to fight for the right to return to my normal life. Daily work, despite the pain and tears, brought good results. And after a year, I was able to stand on my feet. This is only the beginning, and there's still a long way to go for me to restore my health. I don't know why I needed to prove something to someone because it did not give me anything. Right after the incident, everyone forgot about me. Now I have no money, no fame, and no fans. Would you like to be the strongest person in the world? Give your answers in the comments, click on the thumbs up button, and subscribe to our channel. Hi, my name is Irene, and just recently I have tasted the food that is common for everyone. That is, I did not know any taste in dishes familiar to you, and instead I settled for some kind of baby food until I was 15 years old. The thing is that when my mother was pregnant with me, she was invited to some young parents courses where numerous doctors and coaches were talking about what was good and what was bad for children, as well as about the negative influences of certain foods. My mom was so impressed with the stories about the dangers of salt and sugar that she promised herself that she would do everything possible to make her daughter try these two products as late as possible. Oh, at that moment, no one knew how late this would happen. Since I was a kid, I knew that salt was considered white death, as well as venom and poison, as my mother called it. And I knew that sugar was a drug and a killer of human health, particularly that of teeth. It's a paradox, but despite the lack of salt and sugar in my food, I had dishes which I liked and disliked. For example, I literally hated vegetable stew and loved chicken, and now it is even disgusting to recall them. Oh, yuck! These foods were equally horrible without salt, especially chicken, due to the presence of specific aftertaste, which is pronounced if not neutralized. When I went to kindergarten, a special teacher was even assigned to me who made sure that, God forbid, neither salty food nor dessert with sugar would enter my mouth. It's just that my mother works in sanitary control, and if something had gone wrong in kindergarten, then everyone would have had a very hard time, and most likely that institution would not have actually been closed. I grew up feeling inferior. I wanted to eat what my peers were eating. This was especially relevant at birthday parties of someone in my neighborhood or at the moments when my friends and I were all going out together. For example, I either didn't go out to such events at all, or I went there with my own container of food and a bottle of sour stewed fruit drink. Can you guess what the consequences of this are? In the best case scenario, people sympathized with me asking what I was sick with. But in the worst situations, they just laughed and made fun of me. Once, my classmates and I went hiking with an overnight stay, and of course, I had to eat only the food which my mother had prepared for me in advance. But one of my classmates made a bad joke and stole my meals. I realized that if I complained to the teachers, it would be a real shame, so I could not do anything at all about it. So, what did I do? Nothing. I had to starve for a whole day. But when I returned home, I ate a whole bunch of chicken. Well, I would have eaten a lot more if I had not had valvular annulus. I underwent an urgent surgery, and then the doctor said that it was because of serious overeating. Of course, I swallowed everything in my way after hiking as if I had been starving for a whole month. All in all, I continued to grow up being weird for my peers, with separate meals and a bunch of bottles in my bag. Absolutely no one wanted to talk to me. And I did not understand what was wrong with me and why human food was deadly for me. But my mom did not tell me why I was so different from other people, and only continued saying that salt and sugar were poisonous, and the older I got, the more questions I had. For example, at the age of about 11, I seriously thought about why my parents prepared food for themselves separately, and with great pleasure added 2 ingredients that were forbidden for me: I mean salt and sugar. Why is that? Aren't they afraid of White Death, the gentle killer? But I had not received any logical answers to any of my questions, and this drove me crazy, as well as frightened me at the same time. Once, my parents and I came to visit our friends. At their place, we were celebrating someone's birthday. I can't even remember whose birthday it was. So among the guests, there was one girl my age, and we immediately found a common language, became friends. However, when it was time to sit at the table, I, as usual, refused all the beautiful dishes, smelling delicious, and took out my bottles with special food from my bag. My new friend glanced at me with a frightened look on her face and asked what I was sick with. Then I replied that I did not know my diagnosis and told her everything as it was. Then Monica, that was the name of this girl, suggested that I try a cake secretly from my parents. Even the mere thought that I might eat something containing sugar made me feel anxious and scared, so I told Monica that I couldn't do it. However, my new friend did not give up and continued to persuade me, demonstrating how she was eating a similar cake and enjoying its taste. At some point, curiosity won me over, so I hesitantly took a spoon. And at that moment, my mother showed up in the room and snatched the plate with the cake from my hands, smashing it against the floor and hitting the spoon, basically knocking it out of my hand. After that, she started screaming and saying that I was an ungrateful girl because she and Dad had been protecting me from this poison all my life. But I decided to ruin everything with this little spoon. At that moment, I felt so bad. After my mother's words, that it seemed to me that I was a very bad person. So I promised her never to even look at the forbidden food again. Well, after such screams and attacks, food will stick in your throat involuntarily, and the cake will evoke only the worst associations. In short, I continue eating disgusting food, tasteless food, for a long time. Well, for me, it was quite normal because I did not know how salty and sweet food tasted. It's now that I recall everything like a bad dream. I think you understand that sooner or later I will try something prohibited, and not because the forbidden fruit is sweet, but because this is life. Every day I am surrounded by sweet and salty food, literally everywhere. Well, I cannot eat tasteless baby food forever. It happened when my parents visited our relatives who lived in Poland. I had plenty of unsalted convenience food for the whole week and even a pot of stew with meat and vegetables, which of course were without salt. In short, my mother took good care of me, so I had nothing to worry about. However, the very next day after my parents' departure, when I was returning home from school, the roof of the building I was passing by collapsed on my head. I immediately fainted, and while I was unconscious, I was taken to the hospital by ambulance and even had brain surgery. When I came to my senses, there were nurses next to me, and they said that I had been unconscious for 2 days. But at that time, nothing threatened my life, and the first thing I had to do was eat, so that my body had enough energy to recover. In front of me, there was a tray with some hospital dishes, and the first question I asked if there was salt and sugar in those foods. The nurses were really surprised when I told them that I could eat neither of them, and that I didn't even know why. Then they went somewhere and returned a few minutes later with a doctor. He said that I must definitely eat what they give me and assured me that nothing bad would happen to me. I asked if my parents gave permission and was hesitating for a long time, but still I was very hungry, and this affected my consciousness. I took a spoon and oh my God, what is this? This chicken soup? It was an explosion of flavor. I couldn't believe that food could be so delicious. I think I even rolled my eyes and purred with pleasure. It was just an incredible and unspeakable experience. The doctors and nurses were watching in amazement how I was enjoying each spoonful, and then the police showed up in the office. I could not understand the reason for their visit. Has anything happened to my parents? But as it turned out, the doctor invited them. They're saying that there was child abuse in my family which led to health problems. The doctor explained that salt is necessary for every person in small amounts, and since my body didn't get this product at all, he noticed some problems that were related to the water-salt balance. And the worst thing is that, in fact, I've constantly been in a state of dehydration. It turned out to be 15 years. My parents believed that they were making an invaluable contribution to my health, but in fact, they ruined it with their own hands. And this is not to mention my psychological state because I had to endure a lot of limitations, offenses, deprivation during this time. From the hospital, I was taken to the Children's Residential Care Facility, and I stayed there for almost 2 weeks. Yeah, it was not very comfortable there, and in fact, the institution cannot be compared with my home. But all this time, I was taking immense pleasure in the variety and diversity taste that ordinary food has. Why have my parents been depriving me of such pleasure for so many years? 2 weeks later, through the court trial, I was returned to my family, and as it turned out, my parents understood what their mistake was. And earlier, they had not even realized the lectures they listened to when my mom was pregnant related only to babies. It is they who cannot eat salt and sugar, not teenagers. Now my parents and I consume the same food, but I have a new problem. I love the taste of food so much that I started to eat a lot, and because of this, I'm gaining weight. I hope I will be able to handle this problem. Have you ever tried eating your usual dishes without salt? How does it feel? Share your impressions in the comments below this video, and also do not forget to click on the thumbs up button and subscribe to our channel. Hi, my name is May, and I was faced with a terrible situation. My parents lost their memory and don't remember me at all. The situation turned my whole life upside down. I'll start the story about my childhood. From an early age, I was called a real miracle and a true sign of faith because doctors determined my mother had a terrible diagnosis of infertility. My parents had already given up and didn't hope for anything. But one fine day, they heard great news. They were going to have a baby. My birth was celebrated with the whole family, and even at that time, I was in the center of a unified adoration. As soon as I got a little older, I began to understand that for my sake, my parents would stop at nothing, and I often took advantage of it. I was that child who was never denied anything. My mom and dad were ready to carry out whatever I asked for, from buying a new doll to visiting an amusement park for the whole day. My friends envied me because their parents didn't allow them to do a lot of things, and I was proud of the fact that I was so lucky. Besides that, we spent all our time together. Our favorite places were the city garden square, a meadow for basket picnics near the lake outside the city, and a large water park. At that time, I thought that such an idyllic lifestyle would last forever. But I was wrong. The older I got, the more needs and desires I had. My parents didn't like some of them at all, and for the first time, they began to prohibit me for some things, which of course I didn't like. I became the teenager who thought that my parents were always against me and didn't understand anything at all. They were shocked that their precious little May had turned into a spiteful girl who repeatedly threw tantrums if she didn't get something. The situation reached a point that a serious scandal broke out, after which I was deprived of my pocket money and a summer vacation in Greece. Then, hot with rage and offense, I told them that I no longer wanted them to be a part of my life. My mom and dad didn't answer me anything, and the next day they flew to Greece, and I was left to be bored at home alone, sometimes going out to parties with friends. Frankly speaking, I secretly wanted my parents to rest in Greece as long as possible, or not return at all. Then certainly no one would command me. One afternoon, I was watching my favorite TV show when suddenly I received a phone call. The number wasn't identified, so I decided not to answer. After they called 4 times, I decided to pick up the phone and was ready to yell at the annoying caller. It turned out that somebody had tried to contact me from a local hospital because in the morning, my parents who had returned from the trip abroad were hospitalized there. They were driving home but got into a car accident. My mom and dad were critically ill, and their condition was extremely unstable. When I listened to the doctor, I felt very strange. I didn't even fully understand what he was saying, but as soon as the call was over, I had such a nervous breakdown that I had never had before. I sat on the floor and sobbed, unable to stop. I would have done this all day long, but I had to go to the hospital. There, I was allowed to go into my parents' room looking at how they were lying motionless on their beds. For some reason, I was scared, and because of this, I couldn't make a move. The doctor said that this was a normal reaction, and if it was difficult for me to be there, he could inform me about their state of health by phone. I vaguely remembered the next week as my physical and mental state was also stretched thin. I hardly slept, ate very little, and kept hold of the phone while sitting in absolute silence. I also hated myself for the way I treated my parents. The last words that I said to them before leaving got stuck in my head. I shouted that I didn't want to see them again, and now realizing that they were hanging between life and death, I was afraid I would never be able to apologize to them. One day, the doctor called me and said that my parents recovered from their coma, but there was one that needed to be discussed when I got there. Inspired by the great news, I literally flew to the hospital. There, I immediately asked to be allowed into my parents' room, but the doctor stopped me. He asked me to sit down, and then he told me the terrible news. My parents remember practically nothing, including me. Because of the accident, they suffered amnesia and could barely remember their own names. When I entered the room, the doctor explained I was their daughter. They looked at me quizzically, as if they had seen me for the first time in their lives. My parents smiled politely, but they looked upset, and that frightened me so much that I immediately burst into tears. The doctor began to calm me down, saying that soon they will recover and our family would get back into the groove of things. It's just that it takes time. When I left the room, the doctor added that over time, their memory may be partially returned, but it's impossible to predict what exactly they will remember. I visited my parents every day. I also brought various family photos with me. However, we didn't have any photos of us together when I was already a teenager because I tried to isolate myself from my parents and spend as little time with them as possible. When they looked at the photo album, I saw total bewilderment in their eyes. It scared me so much that I left the hospital. I almost went crazy because it was very painful for me to see my parents in such a state. But I had to go through this stage of treatment because the photos can help them recover faster, is what the doctor had told me. One late evening, just as I was about to go to bed, I received a phone call. The doctor was worried and asked me to come to the hospital as early as possible in the morning. From what I heard the next day, I almost fainted. My parents partially regained their memory, but this rather complicated situation, they remembered fragments from their youth, their own wedding, and how my mother was told that she couldn't have children. At the same time, they forgot everything that happened after the accident and didn't even remember that I had visited them. This rare form of amnesia occurs only after severe trauma, and people's memories can randomly appear and disappear until absolute recovery. As a result, when I entered the ward, my mom and dad looked at me as if they had never seen me. I simply didn't exist. Although a few days ago my mother called me her daughter, the doctor said that at that moment they were seriously shocked, as they had already managed to forget how old they are and where they are. Now we had to jointly recall their memories and return them to reality, and I had a plan in my head that it seemed to me should work. But for this purpose, it was necessary to take my parents away from the hospital. For a long time, I begged the doctors to allow me to take them away just for one day, and in the end, I obtained their consent. However, my parents weren't eager to go somewhere with me because for them, I was a strange girl who was trying to give herself out to be their daughter. This time, I didn't try to convince them and just promised that I could help them when they agreed. The first thing we did was drive past the water park, which we visited every weekend. My mother said that she would definitely visit it after rehabilitation, and she's sure that she would like the place. And I was very happy with this reaction. Then we drove past our house, but I decided that it wasn't worth entering it because my parents could remember all of our fights that constantly took place there. The next stop was the square where we used to walk almost every day. We wandered there for several hours, and from time to time, I noticed their confused looks. The walk didn't give a lot of results, and then the last place remained, a basket picnic meadow where we often sat. Talking heart to heart, I brought their favorite juice, candles, some ready-made sandwiches, and we headed there. They still didn't believe that I was their daughter. Mom even cried, saying that she would never be able to have children, and such pranks hurt her very much. I felt unbearably sorry for her then. I began to talk about our past, insisting that I was their child after all. I talked for a long time about bright moments from my childhood in order to stir up emotions in them. My parents listened to me with embarrassed faces. I saw serious bewilderment in their eyes. I felt hurt and sad from this. But through my tears, I continued to talk about the past, touching upon our last fight. I was so desperate that I was no longer afraid to reveal the truth about our relationship. In the course of the story, my mother suddenly began to change countenance and then abruptly hugged me. From the surprise, I froze for a minute. unable to move or say anything. Then my mother said that she suddenly remembered our last conversation, and she was very hurt by my words. But now she was incredibly glad that she finally recognized me. Her memory began to return to her, and then to Dad. The doctor was surprised by this result and said that it was incredibly lucky. Now my parents are still in the hospital, but they can already precisely remember some events from our common family life. The hospital even held a meeting of doctors on this matter. Everyone was amazed that my parents had the same form of amnesia, and the symptoms developed almost synchronously. The experts concluded that this was due to the identical head injuries received in the accident. However, they don't remember my childhood at all. When I was a nice child in their memory, there was only an image of a bratty teenager who liked to make scandals. It offended me, but at the same time, it stimulated me to change for the better. How would you feel if your parents forgot about you? Write your answers in the comments, like the video, and share it with your friends.